Welcome to Belief Busters Podcast, where we change the world one belief at a time. And we're dedicating this series to changing the world by looking at what are our beliefs around racism, systemic racism, and I want to give you a voice to the conversation. And so I invite you to the discussion. I'm glad you could be with us on this journey of discovery and awakening. Welcome to another episode of Belief Busters. Today we have Meg Brunson. She's going to be our guest on our show, and she is a professional speaker, children's book author, host of the Familypreneur podcast, and get this, CEO of EIEI marketing. Don't you just want to sing along when I said that? I did. Her professional career is focused on entrepreneurship and marketing, and she is currently living in an RV full-time with her husband and four daughters throughout the United States. Meg was born in a predominantly white community in Western New York and never considered herself uneducated or a racist, right? Until she welcomed a biracial child into the world. So I've invited Meg to talk about her beliefs about race, how has it changed through raising her biracial daughter and her 3 white daughters as well. Welcome, Meg.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here with you.
I am. I'm excited to have this conversation. What I love about this time in our society is there's this willingness to have these types of conversations that people weren't willing to do. You know, they weren't willing to have. It was kind of like we'd glance, make a judgment, and then move on. But there wasn't that kind of engagement about what's your life like? How is this working out for you? Are there issues? So I'm just really so glad for your willingness and your vulnerability to have the discussion.
Yeah, it's definitely not easy. It's not an easy discussion to have, but I really believe that if I can share my experience and my journey, then other people who came from a similar place that I came from may be able to relate to that and understand that it's not, in this case, admitting that you have racist beliefs or that you follow racist policies or benefit from racist policies. It doesn't make you a bad person. It's not black or white because it was systematically pushed upon us. And we have to acknowledge it and then work against it to climb out of it, if that makes sense. So it's
No, it does.
I'm not saying it's a good thing, but it doesn't make you a bad person.
When we talk about racism, there's this label that if you are racist, you are a bad person, But the thing is, you aren't a bad person. You are raised in a society that is systemically geared for racism. And that's a whole different ball game. And until we can own it, until we can own that this is the playing field that we're on, that people of color are at a disadvantage, just based on how the laws are structured, just based on how the economic, the justice system, all of that is structured, we're always going to come out on the low end of the totem pole, right? So until we understand that it's systemic, we're not going to be able to change anything.
Right.
Yeah.
And I always say it's like a spectrum. So yes, there are people who are those bad people, right? That are intentionally being mean or being cruel or being hateful. There are people on that extreme. I believe there's much more people who fall on the end of passive racism.
Correct.
Where they're just kind of happy with the status quo, which happens to be a racist status quo.
Yeah. Well said. Thank you. So before you became pregnant, Meg, what were your thoughts or feelings about racism? Did you have any? What were your thoughts about things like affirmative action?
So like I said, I was raised in a predominantly white area. I mean, the city that was near me did have a diverse population, but my town was primarily white. There were 2 Black children that went to my elementary school, and they were cousins. So, like, of course, they were related.
Right.
And that was kind of the extent of my exposure to diversity, was those two people. And there's one Asian girl who was adopted. So it's like I had a very white upbringing. What I took away basically from school was that, you know, there was slavery, there was inequality. We learned about Jim Crow. We learned about civil rights, Martin Luther King, and Martin Luther King ended it. He, you know, the civil rights movement was over.
Yes.
There is equality now, and the end, you know, the happy end. And affirmative action, you know, was a thing. And I remember applying for colleges, and there were, you know, I was able to apply for certain, what's the word, like grants or scholarships. That's what I'm looking for, scholarships, because I was a woman. But then there were some scholarships I wasn't able to apply for because I wasn't Black or I wasn't Native American, and I don't know why. I mean, I do know why. It's related to privilege. But I didn't see an issue with the fact that I, as a woman, was able to apply for scholarships for women. But I thought it was unfair that people of color would get to apply for scholarships that would put them at an advantage over me. And I felt like it would make it harder for me to get what I wanted if and I feel like it's hard for me to say this, but if Black people were given preference over me, and that felt like it was putting me at a disadvantage. So I know there was a time in my life where I, you know, rolled my eyes at affirmative action policies. And I think part of it was not really understanding the real history of it. It wasn't just Martin Luther King got rid of racism, the end. That there was more to it that I wasn't aware of. I was just ignorant.
Yeah. No, I hear you. I you know, as you were describing your story about college, I can remember applying for scholarships. I remember applying to universities, and the high school that I went to was predominantly white. And I remember classmates just really like, oh, well, you'll get in because, you know, you're part of that quota system. But if I applied there, I'm sure that I wouldn't get in. And I thought, I worked my butt off. Are you kidding me? You know, and the idea that giving someone something or helping someone who's at a disadvantage means that there's less for everyone else is part of the propaganda, I think, you know, of that there isn't enough, that if you give to one people, then other people will lose their privilege, will lose all the perks that they have. So it's a really interesting conversation to have, and I appreciate your honesty, you know, in what your feelings are. And I think when we look at it of what's going on right now, you know, the cry for equality and a level playing field, I think that's the fear that's coming up for people of privilege, that, well, if we level it, then I'm not going to have the privilege that I'm used to.
So I know for me, coming from an entrepreneurial standpoint, we talk a lot about scarcity mindset. And I feel like that's exactly what this is. Like, as an entrepreneur, you feel like you're in constant competition with other people in your field, and there's not enough money to go around, or there's not enough clients for everybody. And I think that it's its own variation on the same mindset concept, that scarcity mindset, that we have to learn that there is abundance. You know, we can have an abundance mindset, that there's enough for everybody, that we can all get an education. We can all, you know, take our share of the financial pie. We can all survive and thrive together. That we don't have to be pushing an entire race of people down.
Correct. Yay. Amen. Preach it, sister, I would say. Yes. So since you're coming from it sounds like a predominantly white background, and then you became pregnant, and now it's like, oh, how is this going to work with my family, you know, immediate family, my friends? What was it like?
So I wasn't So here's the thing for like my immediate family, my mom, my dad died when I was young, but my mom's always been very accepting. And so I didn't have I didn't really have a fear of her, I don't know, disowning me or something. Like you hear those like horror stories. I didn't have any fears about that so much, but I was very nervous about just everything I didn't know. You know, like her hair would be different. Like I know it might sound silly, but I'm like, how am I going to take care of her hair? I was so worried about her hair before she was even born because I didn't know how I would take care of her hair, and I worried about very early on in the pregnancy. I will just mention that her biological father did not want to be involved any further in the relationship. So I just want to mention that. So I knew that I didn't really have any Black role models in my life. Like I didn't have a trusted Black friend to go to be like, how do I take care of her hair? Or should we celebrate Kwanzaa now? Or, because I didn't want to be, I didn't want to ignore her culture. I wanted her to grow up understanding her culture and her heritage, but I didn't understand the culture or the heritage. So I didn't really know how to do that. I think that was my biggest concern. And to weave in one story that happened that kind of relates back, and this is a tough story for me to tell, but I was pregnant with my daughter, and I had an interaction with a coworker at work who is a person of color. I believe she identifies as Black, and this is a long time ago, 12, 13 years, identifies as Black, has some Native American heritage as well. And I wasn't as good of friends with her as a bunch of other people were. And I made a joke, trying to be kind of in with the cool crowd, if you will, that was not okay. It was not taken well. And so she reported it, and I was brought in for like a coaching for telling a racist joke, for being racist. And at the time, I jumped into the defensive, right? I stated that I wasn't racist. I was having a Black baby, therefore I couldn't be racist. Which now, of course, is a little comical because that's clearly not, it doesn't mean anything. It goes deeper than that. And now looking back, I see a lot of the issues, a lot of the problems, and with my line of thinking, with my line of rationalizing what I had said and done, and that what I should have done was listen to her feelings, acknowledge her feelings, reflect on my actions. I was more concerned about my intent than I was the impact it had on people. And so that's a shift I've had to make, that my intent doesn't matter. It's the impact that I have that matters. So, I mean, really, up until the point where I'm pregnant with my child, I'm still holding on to what falls on the spectrum of racist beliefs, that I am not racist, that I cannot be racist because I am having a Black baby.
Oh, that's powerful. Yes.
So yeah, during the time of my pregnancy, it was really just this concern about being a good enough parent to her, knowing that I was culturally and, that I didn't share the same culture and heritage that she would likely look like. Because I feel like she is, when people look at her, they see a Black child. They don't see a half white child. Do you know what I mean?
Yes, I do. Yes, I do.
And so I feel like that was my biggest concern, was being enough of a mom for her. And when I told my mom, I do remember telling her, number one, I had to tell her I was pregnant because I was not married and all that good stuff.
Right.
So number one was telling her I was pregnant. And then number two, I felt like I had to tell her the father is Black. And it was one of those things where it was very like, I realize now I didn't need to tell her. I don't think she cared. Do you know what I mean?
So great. Yes.
And I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but I'm really proud of her and how she's reacted over the past, because she clearly was raised in the same area that I was raised, that same white area, but in an older time.
Right.
And right now on social media, a lot of the people who kind of raised me, her friends, I can't have conversations with them about this because they're not there.
Got it.
They're still very much stuck in that privileged perspective. And more than once, their answer to me is that we need to agree to disagree, which I cannot do. I cannot agree to disagree when it comes to the safety of my child or an entire race of people. But my mom is really pushing those limits. Like, she's pushing herself outside of the box. And I know that I feel like it's tougher the older you get, not to call her old in case she's listening.
She's not.
She might eventually. But, I think it's tougher, the older generations, because there's more that they have to unlearn and unpack.
Absolutely. I agree with you.
So luckily that went much smoother than I thought it was going to be, but it also was just the beginning because I hadn't even had a baby yet.
Right. And I'm grateful that you had her for support and that love. That's so important. And you didn't have to go through what some folks have to go through when there's a biracial child involved. All right. So now you've given birth to this beautiful baby girl, and you're raising her and you're supporting her. You're realizing you are a good enough mom for her. And how has her life been? Has she been impacted by racism? And how do you deal with it?
And I'll tell you, looking back, the first time I can recognize she was impacted by racism, I didn't recognize it at the time. And I think it was that whole privileged piece where I thought still that, I don't know, maybe I thought my whiteness would protect her from some of that, or again, that we ended up moving back to my hometown, and I kind of thought she would just be accepted, for who she was. And so the first time that, like I said, we dealt with racism, let me just preface by saying she was always a smart kid, and I know everybody says that, I'm sure, about their kids. But by 18 months, she was speaking in like short sentences, like 5 or 6 words, and she could count to 10 and say her ABCs. She was such a smart kid. She picked up on things fast, and she was so funny. And when she went to school, all of a sudden, it was like I didn't know her anymore, because the reports I was getting back from the teachers were like, she's impulsive, she doesn't keep her hands to herself, she's like getting in the other kids' faces. And I wasn't sure what to make of all of it, because I'm like, well, she didn't go to preschool, so maybe this is just her adjusting to being in a school environment, where she was just like at home or in daycare, which isn't as structured as preschool. So we started to just try to make accommodations and figure things out. The school started to imply they thought she might have ADHD. So at 5, we took her to the pediatrician. Like, I want to do all the things. I want to be a good mom. So we do all the things, and it's just progressively, she's just getting into more and more trouble for more and more things. And I start to feel like she just might have some behavioral issues, or I don't know. I had a really difficult time thinking she might have learning issues because she was so bright. But I started to think that there might be behavior issues that were just starting to surface, and they continued on into 1st grade. And I recall, this is the first time I recall racism that I am ashamed that I did not recognize in the moment. We went to a meeting for her behavioral needs, and talking about, what we could do to help her be successful in 1st grade. And one of the things that we were told is that despite the school policy that the girls could wear their hair any way they wanted to wear it on non-gym days. On phys ed days, they had to wear their hair pulled back because it was phys ed. But despite that policy at the school, we were asked to keep her hair pulled back every day because her hair was so large and full, and it would pose a distraction for other kids in the class who
Are
wouldn't
you
be
kidding
able.
me?
No.
Oh my
And
God.
they made it seem like she was like, when her hair was down, she'd be like playful with it. And like I said, at this point, like I feel awful as today me not calling them out on that, but
Sure.
I didn't see it for what it was.
Absolutely. I hear you.
But now that's like, it's ingrained in my brain that I'll never forget in first grade. And you know what ended up happening? So in first grade, she had just turned 6 in September, and it was in December. They called me in for a meeting to discuss proactive techniques to help her be successful in first grade, and they kicked her out. They kicked her out of the private school.
Oh my God.
I
For
promise
what?
you,
For what reason? Okay.
she was
For
not
what
that bad
reason? Yeah.
because they said that they couldn't accommodate her occupational therapy needs. And these occupational therapy needs, for anybody who's familiar, I mean, it was stuff like having fidget toys. They would allow her to chew gum just to help like keep her impulses under control. She had this little like bubbly thing she would sit on that was like,
Oh,
you know,
yes.
it
I've
would like
seen
move
those.
around. We're on video, so I'm like showing you how she would move around. So there were little things that we tried to put into place, and these were all put in place because the teachers were telling me she was impulsive, she couldn't focus, she couldn't
Yes.
pay attention, that she wasn't listening to the other kids' social cues, that she was being a bully, that she was doing, and now looking back, and I've talked to my current husband about this, who is white, just because we are talking about racial issues.
Right. Right.
I wonder now how many of those issues in school were real issues.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like if the hair was not a real issue, if that was a racial issue, a racist policy, how many of the other things were because of a racial bias, were because she had darker skin than any other girl in her class, that she, you know, when she acted out, she was a bully as opposed to trying to be, you know what I mean? Trying to be
I
playful.
do. I do.
And the more I read and the more I research now, the more I feel guilty because I think I missed all of those cues and I believed the teachers. And then in turn, believed that my child was somehow not performing or not living to her full potential. Do you know what I mean? That there was something
I
wrong
do.
with her,
I do.
and there was never anything wrong with her,
Yeah.
ever.
Yeah. And that experience is so common in the Black communities. You know, I mean, there have been so many studies about it just being a pipeline to jail. You know, like school now has become, for people of color, children of color, a pipeline directly into incarceration. And it's those unconscious biases from teachers who refuse to assess their own biases and project that onto children who then, you know, they're little sponges at that point. They're just taking in everything that is told to them, you know, and it's
Right.
like every slight, every cut, every you're not good enough, every what's wrong with you, you know, and then the child believes that to be their
And then they
truth.
become that. Yeah.
Correct. Correct. It's a self-fulfilling
And
prophecy, right?
it's funny, somebody asked on social media, like, when was the first time you had a Black teacher? And I honestly don't think I've ever had one.
I saw that.
I can't think of one. There was a band teacher who was Black at my high school, but I didn't take band. And my daughter, Kaylin, has never had a Black teacher. And what is that? Like, what kind of a message is that?
Well, it's the message.
I'm going to go down a rabbit hole. Sorry.
I know but it's the message, right? That white is in power and is in control. They are the right, person, and everyone has to like conform to that. That's the power structure. And we learned that from really young.
Yeah.
And as your daughter's been growing up, and and you've had 3 other daughters who are white with your current husband, what's been changing in your perspective about racism?
Oh, I can tell another story that I feel like perfectly illustrates that. We were invited to a pool party at a friend's house. So we went to the pool party, and there were a lot of people there. Like a big house, big pool, you know what I mean? A lot of people there, but mostly white people. Again, I am not perfect. I feel like I have a very big network online, but most of my friends in person were white, and this was a white friend's house. And at one point, I was inside with my husband and with a couple other people, and a woman came in and said, one of the neighborhood kids snuck in to the pool party. Will somebody come with me to confront them? And it wasn't a neighborhood kid. Yep. It was my kid.
Yeah.
And so once I realized what was going on, as this grown woman gathered a couple other people to back her up to go talk to my 10-year-old child.
Yes.
I was like, that's my daughter. Did she do something wrong? I mean, was she splashing people? Was she eating in the pool? I mean, by all means, if she's doing something wrong, we need to address that. Oh, no, nothing. Of course. I see the resemblance now. You see the resemblance now? Like, I don't even know. So it's like, in this situation, nobody gave my white kids a second glance, but that one Black child. And not only that, but like I said, that woman needed backup. For what? She's not a big kid. Like, even if she was, but she's 10, 11 years old. You need backup? Is she dangerous? Are you threatened by her?
Obviously.
That kind of stuff, it drives me nuts, because it's so easy for people to think that doesn't happen anymore just because it doesn't happen to you. And I was there. And that's why it's important to me to share some of these stories about the fact that I've told racist jokes and the fact that I've been annoyed at affirmative action. Because when you don't see it happening, it's easy to write it off like, that's not a true story. You're playing the race card. You've heard all those things, all those excuses. But I'm experiencing it, and I'm feeling those fears as we're traveling the United States, and we stop at a rest stop, and my kids need to go in and go to the bathroom, and I don't want my Black child to go in by herself. I want her younger white sister to go with her, because I feel like maybe then she won't get accused of stealing something. Or, do you know what I mean? Like, I think about these things.
Yeah.
And it's not playing a race card. It's realizing that we've talked about systematic racism, and the more and more I research and the more and more I learn, it's like change can't happen overnight, and there simply hasn't been enough time between like Martin Luther King and today for there to be no racism. Progress has been made, but we need to keep making progress, or else we're going to fall right back into old systems. And I don't want that for anybody, but I don't want that for my daughter.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. No, I hear you. Yes, there has been progress that has made, but the systems haven't changed. The systems
Right.
that were designed by white patriarchs, is still the same system that we operate under. So, yeah, change has to happen. What I'm liking is that it's becoming more aware and spoken about around the globe. So it
Hmm.
feels like we're finally on that tipping point of consciousness that we say no more. It has to change now. I'm hoping.
I'm I'm hoping so too.
Yeah. Are you able to have these kinds of discussions with your daughter, and how's she doing, and what's her perspective on this?
That's a great question. Um, so she is 12 now,
Okay.
and now she has a diverse range of friends. So that's something that when we lived in New York, most of her friends were white, and now she has a very diverse group of friends, which I appreciate. So I know that her and her friends talk about race and talk about
Mhm.
color, which I think is good. Um, but she hasn't really identified any strong um, desire to like protest or advocate at this point. Um,
Mhm.
she, she's a little put off by the fact that the protests are taking up so much time on TikTok when she wants to watch dancing. Um, so I think part of that is age. Part of
Yes.
that is that she's 12. Um,
Yes.
but we're also, as her parents, we have a level of control over what we expose her to, and so we're really trying to be intentional about the places we go and the things that we do
Mhm.
while we're RVing. Um,
Mhm.
when we went to Alabama, I remember ignorantly being like, I don't know what we're going to do there. Like, what is Alabama known for? I have no idea. What are we going to do there? And then I found out Birmingham is a civil rights institute.
Right.
Bam, that's what we're doing. And it was through visiting there that I reflected back on the 6 or 7 months that we had been on the road. We've gone and seen Eleanor Roosevelt's house, the
Mhm.
Jefferson Memorial, the the Eric Carle Museum, Dr. Seuss, all white people.
Yeah.
It wasn't intentional. It
Right.
wasn't. It was just that's what we ended up doing. When we went to the Baseball Hall of Fame, there was an exhibit on the Negro League, so we got to.
Right.
But we've never gone somewhere that specifically honored a black person. And
That's
so
powerful.
after the Birmingham Civil Rights Museum, which honored, I mean, a variety of black people, I've taken a step back, and now we've been parked for COVID, and we're
Mhm.
planning our next excursions, and we're trying to be very intentional about seeking out museums and monuments and opportunities to learn about black history,
Okay.
because black history is American history.
Yes, it is. Yes, it
But for
is.
some reason, systematic racist reason, we separate black history out from American history, and it shouldn't be like that.
Right.
So we're trying to
Like it's a
blend.
parallel universe, like like we didn't all live at the same time. Yeah.
Right. Right. So we're trying to kind of blend those lines back together for the kids. We are homeschooling right now while we're traveling. And
Okay.
that in itself has been an amazing experience because we're in control of the information. Um, and of course, we're trying to be as truthful as possible, but we're able to, like I said, blend those lines a little bit, like not just focus on a white curriculum, but I found some really great resources. There's one resource I'll mention. It's called Black Classical University, and it's by a woman that I had met, and she focuses on teaching kids from a perspective of Black history.
Oh,
And so
wow.
I
Cool.
love that. So we're taking a Black Lives Matter 101 course through her now, and just really trying to incorporate more of a diverse history into
Yes.
their American history studies.
Cool. Very cool. Yeah, I love that. Do you feel like there's something that you're being called to do?
And that's a tough question. I feel like it's loaded, right? I'm, like I said, trying to be intentional with my own children. I feel like they're the easiest to control. So trying to be intentional with what I teach them. And I'm actually launching a new podcast in the coming weeks, hopefully within the next 7 to 14 days from when we're recording this. And it's going to be called White Privilege and Black History. And it's my white privileged perspective on learning more Black history with the goal of encouraging other people dealing with this internal interruption, right? Like that what they've been taught all their lives isn't necessarily the whole story. So
Right.
they're in the process of interrupting those internal thoughts that they've been taught and then re-educating them. It's just, here's what I learned, and then providing resources to learn more about that thing. So the first couple episodes are the Tulsa Race Massacre and
Yep.
Fred Shuttlesworth, Reverend Fred Shuttlesworth, who was a civil rights leader, not as well known as Martin Luther King Jr.
Mm-hmm.
So just a couple different, I'm hoping that by learning more, we're going to be better equipped to be better allies, to support the movement. But I kind of believe that my role as a white person is to do some of that work that makes it easier for the Black leaders who don't have the time to coddle the white people. So it's
I
like
hear you.
as the white people are coming to this realization, it's not easy. So helping with that transition process and then connecting people to the leaders, you know, that can help them make a difference in the area that they want to make a difference in. Because there's so many issues. There's education, there's law enforcement, there's incarceration.
Right.
There's so many facets. So I don't know if everything I'm doing is right. I'm sure that there's people who think I'm doing a great job and people who think I'm doing something a little bit wrong. But I think the best thing to do is just to do something. And then if and when people come at me with grievances or feedback, to try not to be defensive, to listen to them, to have a conversation with them, and to see how I can adjust what I'm doing to be more helpful. But if I sit around and wait until I know what to do perfectly, then I'm never going to do anything. So
absolutely. I support you 100% on that. And it's great because what you're providing is like a primer, a space that people can engage with you, a white person, and, you know, say, but I don't understand this or whatever, you know, and it's not, they don't have to be afraid. They don't have to be defensive, you know, and it's, and it gives them a resource as opposed to, you know, some believe that it's people of color's responsibility to educate them and tell them, and it's not. You know, we're happy to share our journey and have people ally with us, but it's not our responsibility to educate you, you know?
Right.
So I think what you're doing is a needed niche. It really is. And if I can support you in any way, Meg, I mean that honestly, let me know, because it's needed. It's needed.
Well, I'm hoping to help in any way that I can without taking, while still amplifying voices of color. You know, because that's the other piece. It's real easy for me to be loud, but I realize that it's not my role to be loud right now. So I'm trying to cope with that too.
I get that. And I love when you said, if I waited to have everything perfect and know exactly what I'm doing, I'll still be waiting. And so for our listeners, I want you to hear that everyone's voice is needed. Everyone's ears and heart is needed. And we are going to do this imperfectly. We are going to fail at times. And here's the thing. We can just try again. We can self-correct, right? We get that feedback. We go, oh, okay, I can see that. Let me try this avenue. Let me try this approach. So I encourage you to just try, just take whatever that one thing that's calling you, step into it imperfectly.
Yes.
Any last words that you want to suggest to our listeners before we say goodbye?
Oh, gosh, I feel like those were great last words. I don't want to overshadow them. I guess, and after I said that, I've said this before, but like racism is multifaceted, and everybody can play a different role. Some people are able to give money, some people are able to give time, some people are able to show up at the protests with bottles of water and medical kits. No matter how you can contribute, just contribute. And don't compare yourself to other people, because some people can do one or the other. You just have to find what you can do and know that it's needed, it's appreciated, and it's going to help.
Yes. Yes. Couldn't say it better. Thank you, Meg. So appreciate you being here on Belief Busters.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us on this exploration of belief systems. I hope this gives you permission to change your beliefs and subsequently the world. Make sure you subscribe to this podcast and leave a review wherever you listen. You can reach me at info@preachitsister.com. I've also written a book, Turning Your Why into Why Not, that gives you practical resources and steps that you can take to continue on the journey of exploring what your belief systems are. I look forward to seeing you next time on Belief Busters Podcast. See you on the flip side.